Well. Hello, everybody. This is Nels. Sorry for the slight delay on getting started today. I'm having a little bit of a challenge with my PowerPoint today. I'm using a new technique for doing the PowerPoint, and I think I'm not totally sure if I got it right yet. So we'll start from just an introduction. I have been talking a lot about persuasion and how to become better at giving business presentations. And you might recall I did a YouTube a few months ago, maybe now, about how to make your presentation 10 times better in an hour. And that incorporates, of course, typically what we use business presentations for is to become more persuasive, or to be persuasive, rather. And of course, being more persuasive in that situation is better than being less persuasive, since we're trying to persuade people, whether it's to make a decision in our favor or to fund a project or to let us off the hook for something we might have done. There's all kinds of things you might be doing a presentation about. Or you may be maybe trying to convince some developers to work on your project, right? That's another thing you might be doing. And so to me, it seems like it's a truism that becoming better at persuasion is the same thing as becoming better at doing business presentations, and vice versa. So that's a lot of the things that I want to talk about tonight. Now, I do have to figure out where my PowerPoint is, because I think I managed to make it go away. And yeah, that's not the right slide. So let me do a little bit of work here to try to find the right slide, make sure that my slide is showing correctly in the PowerPoint window. And it should be that one, but it's not. So let me do this. It's amazing how often the technology has not perfectly worked for me in these presentations. So let me cancel that. There we go. I think that's now the right thing. Good. So how to make better business presentations. Let's see if it's in the right size over here. It is not. So I will fix that really quick. And just make this bigger like this. Beautiful. Okay. Now we're good. So I am going to talk to you a little bit about how to make your business presentations better. And then you sort of have the question of why. The first question, of course, is why we need to do that. But first, let me just introduce myself. I'm your host, Nels Davis. As it says across the bottom there, I'm the author of the Secret Product Manager Handbook, which you can see a cover of over on the screen over there. And I also do coaching. I'm a full-time product manager as well. And I have an upcoming course on persuasion. It's one of the reasons I'm talking about persuasion. And if you like this video, please consider subscribing and sharing it with your other product manager friends who might find it valuable, and all that kind of stuff. So let's talk about why we need to worry about persuasion. I started to talk about this a little bit. We often think, because we're technologists, that, well, let me just put the facts out there and let the audience come to their own conclusion, or the audience will come to the right conclusion if I put the right facts out there. And the fact is that doesn't actually work. That's not the way human beings work. And in fact, a better way to think of ourselves, and particularly if we are technologists, is to start changing your mindset to where you're not a technologist, you're a salesperson. Essentially, we're all salespeople. As product managers, we're always trying to sell our ideas, trying to convince people to get on board with us, trying to increase our influence and make use of our influence. And the way you do that is not by giving people facts. Now, you can use facts. Facts are very important, but they're not the fundamental way that you get people to change their mind or to make a decision. In reality, what you need to think about is that since we're in the middle of all this communication decision making, we have all these different clients and stakeholders. We have to be thinking about a couple things. One is we have to think about their needs, not ours, right? If you're talking to customers, they don't care about what we think or what we want. They care about their problems, right? Same for sales and marketing. They don't care really that much about features unless the features help them sell, and unless we can give them ideas about how to talk about those features in such a way that they can sell better. And so the fact is, if you can become more persuasive, then you get all these benefits. The decisions go your way better. You get faster sales, particularly if you're coaching the sales organization on how to be more persuasive. That's another side effect, right? So there's a lot of presentations where we give the presentation as product managers, but a lot of what we do also is we prepare materials for the sales organization to use when taking our product to market, also for the marketing organization. So we can often use our persuasion skills to up their sales. And if you can do that, of course, that gives you a lot of leverage. We also have to talk to our developers and get them on board with our ideas, and they may have other ideas, and we have to convince them that our ideas are right. And then once, even if we change our mind, which is something we can always do as well, we often have to take their ideas and take them to other organizations and make those ideas sound compelling to other organizations. Like if the dev team has an interesting and sort of unusual design idea that we like, we have to convince other people that that's a good idea and that they should fund it or allow that design idea to go through, and so on and so forth. So lots of benefits to being persuasive. I don't think I need to go into any more detail. So the question is, how can you be more persuasive? And the fundamental rule is that people make decisions based on emotions, and they justify those decisions later using facts. That's typically the way that decision making happens. And I'm not just saying this, a lot of folks have said this in various forms. And so that is why you see people doing things like telling stories and using emotionally engaging things. That's why salespeople often say that people buy from people. They don't buy from, a company. They buy from a person. And that goes to that idea of making an emotional connection. So now this is a rule of thumb. It's kind of an oversimplification, but it's very valuable, and it's a great first cut to use to get a lot more persuasive. If you start thinking about, well, how can I engage somebody's emotions in this conversation, and then back that up with some facts and with some rational justification, you're going to suddenly start being more persuasive, and you're going to start achieving the things that you're trying to achieve. So you have to give both parts. That's part of the goal, part of the deal here. So in this little presentation, it's sort of part one of a series about tips for being more persuasive. And so the tips I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to briefly go over these. Have a goal, use stories. Stories turn out to be super engaging with facts to back those up. And I'll talk a little bit about how to structure that. You want to pre-handle objections, and that actually isn't about objection handling per se. What that is it's about being empathetic to your audience and understanding what your audience is feeling as you present something. Because everybody's individual, and they all have individual needs and desires and worries, and those often don't come up explicitly, and it's up to you, if you want to be more persuasive, to address those things preemptively or proactively. And then one of the best things you can do is practice. That's a really good thing to do as well. So let's quickly move on. So I often talk about this idea of having a goal, and I think there's multiple different kinds of goals you can have. Goals are important for persuasion because if you don't know what you're trying to achieve, it's really hard to achieve it. This is true of all the things we do. It really helps to have some kind of a destination in mind before we start on a trip. And that metaphor works for lots of stuff, and it really works for persuasion and for business presentations in general, right? If you are asked to present something, say your boss asks you to present something to the executive leadership team, well, you should figure out, and maybe you do this in conjunction with your boss, you want to figure out what it is that they want to see and what it is that you want to share with them, or what you want to convince them of, or what you want them to come away from the meeting with, or what decision you want them to make and how they should make that. And if you don't do that, if you just go and sort of spray up a bunch of facts, nobody's going to learn very much. You're going to probably end up really frustrated with the kinds of questions you get in response to that. And you won't have achieved anything because, as I say, facts don't engage. Facts are used for justification, but they're not used for helping people make a decision or get engaged. You need emotions for that. So what are the types of goals you can have? Well, you can have proactive goals, and you can kind of have defensive goals. And we've often been in that situation, right, where somebody asks us to come and present and say why our product is late, right? What are the reasons your product is late? And and come and talk to us about how you failed. That's essentially it. And so the goal there oftentimes is, I want to get out of this room alive. I want to make it seem like maybe we actually are, even though we've had a setback, that we're still in control, that we have a plan for getting out of this delay, or for mitigating it, or for making the best of it, whatever it might be. So that's a sort of a set of defensive goals, even though almost always, as they say in football and I think in war, a good offense is often a good defense, right? If you take the bull by the horns in this situation and say, yes, we did have a slip, and let me tell you all the things we're doing to mitigate that, and why we had that slip. And again, using stories, I'll talk a little bit more about stories, about why that slip had perhaps happened, what you learned, how you can improve things, how there was personal change. Those are all things that happen in stories. Now, you can also have proactive goals, or sort of positive goals, like, I want the group to make a decision on this thing that I'm presenting to them. I want them to make a particular decision based on what I present. I want the group to change the way they think about a particular thing. So those are all ideas about the types of goals that you might be using, or might be building your presentation on when you're giving a presentation. So it's very useful to have a goal, because that helps you figure out how you want to be, how you're going to be more persuasive. So the next tip is really to use stories. And I've talked about this before, and I've talked about it in lots of different situations. But the thing about stories is that stories are very emotionally engaging. As human beings, we're wired to like to like stories, to engage with stories, but they have to have a certain structure. Well, that's actually not quite true. There's a lot of structures for stories. But I like to talk about a very simple structure that enables you to get started on storytelling, even if you're not that skilled at it at the moment. And in fact, that was me. I wasn't that good a storyteller all my life. I've really struggled with storytelling. I learned this structure, and suddenly it made it much easier for me to tell stories, and also to analyze other people's stories, and to start getting a much better sense of why some things were persuasive and some things weren't, because I could detect if there was a story involved. Now, the fundamental thing that happens in a story is there's some kind of a conflict. And the simplest story structure is a story structure where there's a problem, where either you or the customer or somebody's facing a problem that's significant and has some emotional resonance. And you talk about that. That's the first part of the story, setting up the problem. And then you or the customer or whoever does something to try to solve that problem. And in some stories, that does solve the problem. And in some stories, that doesn't solve the problem. And we'll talk about those two different kinds in a second. But there's a solution component. That's the bottom line. It's what you do in order to try to address that problem, or to indeed successfully address the problem. And then the end of the story is the results. What happened as a result of the solution you applied or failed to apply to this problem? And again, you want that to be emotionally compelling. And the thing that makes a really great story is when the issues that you raised in the problem are the issues that are addressed or resonated in the results part. So for example, I'll just give you a quick example. So if I were to say, well, our sales were tanking, my job was on the line, I needed to come up with a way to improve sales. So what I did was I looked at how we did the demo. I figured out that we weren't really demoing right. We weren't taking the customer's perspective very well. We weren't demoing about their problem and how we solved it. We were just showing features and functions. So that's the solution part. And the results were, our sales turned around, I was promoted, and I was even given a pat on the back by one of the VPs that said, we've never sold this way before. This is fantastic. So what I did there was I had a problem, and this is a very simple story, and it's simplified over how I might often tell this story. This is a true story, by the way. So the problem, of course, is that our sales were tanking. So that's kind of a quantitative result, right? It's also, I used emotionally laden words to say the sales are tanking. I also said I was about to be fired. Now that's typically an emotional thing. If your audience is business people, the idea of being fired, that's a very emotionally fraught thing, right? So that's a grabby thing to say if you're talking about a story. So those two aspects make it emotionally grabbing. And might even add more if I were doing a more fully fleshed out version of that story. Then I talked about the solution, things that I did to change the way that we approached the sales process. It happened to be I changed the demo, but that's inconsequential, really. But I did something. And then the results. And the results directly addressed the issues that I talked about in the problem. They talked about the fact that sales were tanking, so sales turned around. They talked about the fact that I was going to be fired. I got a promotion. And they added something else, which was I got kudos from one of my colleagues. And so typically that's a really great structure for a story about success. Now, sometimes when you're trying to pitch an idea for a new product, you might actually want to do it the other way. You might want to pitch a story that is about a failure. And with the idea being that what you're going to do is you're going to, as the results or something, you're going to pitch the idea of solving the problem of addressing that failure. So in this case, it might be our customers are facing this big problem, and you do all the emotional stuff and quantitative and blah, blah, blah. And then you say they've tried to solve that problem in all these different ways that have failed. Hopefully your competitors in there and all kinds of things. And so as a result, I'm suggesting that we create a solution to that problem, and the expected results are going to be customers happy, customers successful, our company successful, we take market share away, right? All those things. So even then the results which are predicted at that point are positive, but it came out of a solution that failed. And so that's a way you might pitch a new project, is to say all these other things other people tried, failed. We think we know how to solve this, and this is what the results are going to be. So the basic story structure, rather, problem, solution, results. So that's a thing to think about. Okay, so moving on. So the point is that you're going to be using these types of stories, and you might not use them literally in that form, right? When you're doing persuasion, you might talk about a problem, and then you might do some stuff to back up that problem and to talk more about details and stuff like that. And then you might talk about a solution, and then you might talk about, in a different point, you might say, and the results were. But the point is that once you know this structure, then you can start thinking about, well, how am I going to bring a story component into this presentation that I'm making? So I have a friend who is responsible for a set of data feeds. So these data feeds come from our customers through our product, and they go out to vendors. And this is actually really important. It's highly sensitive data, and it's also really important to people's lives that this data be handled correctly in a timely fashion. And it's a huge amount of data. And the vendors are always changing sort of their format for how they want the data. There's a data standard, but every vendor kind of does it a little bit differently. Every vendor has a slightly different technical handshake protocol. And of course, as we add features to our product, we have to then align those with the data feeds and figure out how they map and all this stuff. It's a constantly changing thing that this person has to deal with. Now, she has been working on a presentation about what she does, and it had a lot of numbers in it. It had, here's how many data feeds we have, here's how often they have to change, here's how many bugs, here's how many rows there are in the data feed, and things like that. And I said, well, let's step back a minute. Let's tell the story of why this data feed exists, right? We have a particular user, and they need to make a change in something that's going to be really critical to their life. And that change has to be properly reflected out in our vendor's database through our data feeds. And we have hundreds of thousands of these customers making these changes all the time. That's the scale of the problem. And so you make this emotionally compelling. And you also probably would say something about what would happen if we failed to get these updates properly, or we did them incorrectly, or there was an error, and all the bad things that can happen. And so I suggested she start thinking about that story. And then in the context of the story, she can say, and here's how many we have to do. And here's how often the data format changes, and so on and so forth, right? And it also gives a good argument for talking about different kinds of improvements that she wants to make. Like, can we do it more faster? Can we do it more incrementally? Blah, blah, blah. So the point is that when you start putting things in terms of a story, they get much more engaging, even if your goal is to really talk about some numbers and then make an argument for how to improve those numbers, having a story around them is really important. Anyway, that is the whole deal with stories. So I'm going to move on. I talked a lot about stories already. Okay, so one of the things to note, though, is that the stories and the goals go together. So one of the things you want to say your goal is to reduce the group's worry about something that just happened, like maybe you had a slip, or maybe you got some bad feedback from a client or something like that. And so you can use stories to help you set the minds of the audience a little bit more at ease, right? So we can talk about, in this case, we were late and the customers weren't happy, so we changed some things, and now look at how well things are going, or we expect this change to now give us some good results, and we have some early data on that. Or if you want to defer blame, it's another way to use some stories. We were late on a certain thing, but the fact is that we were interacting with another organization and they were late, so it compounded, and now we're going to mitigate that by having better handshaking, and we've caught up again, or whatever the story might be, right? So oftentimes they go together. That's the point I want to do. Now, this is actually sort of my favorite one, pre-handling objections. And what this means, that sounds very dry and it sort of sounds like courtroomy. But what you're really doing here is you're trying to put yourself in your audience's shoes and understand what they are concerned about. So you're going to tell this story, or going to give this information about some situation. And everybody in the room is going to have a different perspective on what that situation means to them, right? So for example, if you're presenting about a slip, the sales organization is going to be worried about, well, I have customers that were waiting for that. How do I deal with it? The finance organization is going to say, well, first of all, it's going to cost us more because it's taking a little more time, plus which we're not going to get the benefits of that feature being on the market right away, and so on and so forth. Everybody has some concerns. The technical, the development side, the engineering side may feel like they're going to get blamed for it. So that's going to be a concern. And so you need to think about what each of the members of your audience is going to be thinking about, and what questions they might ask if they were able to articulate it based on the things that are making them uncomfortable or concerned, right? And so you can think about, if you're giving a report on something that's going on, people are going to say, well, that sounds like they're going to think to themselves, or their inner brain is going to think, well, it sounds like that's going to make them later. Now, they may not be able to even fully articulate that, but that thought is going to make the audience uncomfortable, that member at any rate. And then they're going to go, if you don't address it, they're going to go away feeling like they were disappointed. Now, in some sense, it's their responsibility to ask that question. Is that going to make you later? But really, it's not. It's your responsibility to think in advance of what your audience members are going to be concerned about, most concerned about. Of course, you can't answer every objection proactively, but you can pre-handle a lot of them, like this one, right? Is this change that we're talking about going to impact the schedule? And of course, it might and it might not, but you can be you want to answer that question because it's on somebody's mind, even if nobody asks about it. And so by pre-handling it, you're going to set that person that person's mind at ease, and probably multiple people's minds at ease. And it's also going to make you look like you're in control. So it's actually not just to make people feel better, but it's also to give people a better impression of you. It kind of helps build your brand if you do that. Another example is, there's a lot of things that people might be thinking about. How is this going to impact customer satisfaction? How's it going to impact the release of this feature that I want to get out there? Do we have the expertise to do this? There's so many different things that members of the audience might be thinking about, and you should be thinking about what those are and preparing answers. And now the answers you may actually put into the slides, or if you're doing a slide deck, you may actually want to have a section of the slide deck that says, here's potential problems and what we're doing about them. That's a way of pre-handling objections. You may want to just sprinkle them in different places, or you may just do them, out loud. Now, one thing that's also going to happen is there are probably also going to be questions. And so some of those questions will be objection type of questions. Well, isn't this going to make you later, or make you deliver late? And of course you can answer that. You should know the answer to that question when it comes up. But so you're going to be able to, you're going to answer that question. And one of the things you don't want to do is you don't want to avoid that question. You want to step up to it. Now, some of the questions that you get asked, you might not actually know the answer for. And that's okay. That's okay to not know the answer. But you have to say, I don't know. But let me get back to you next week or tomorrow or on Friday with an answer. And you might, if you've already thought about that question, you might say that. You might say, you know what, that's a really good question. We've thought about it. We don't quite know which way we're going to go on that yet. But we're making a decision very soon. I'd love to get your input on that. So let's circle back tomorrow. We can have a conversation. And then when we make the decision, of course, I'll inform you as well. That might be a way you handle that. But the point is that you're not going to make something up. You're going to say what you really thought of. And if you don't know the answer, you're gonna make an appointment or a commitment to follow up and provide the answer, because that's a reasonable thing to do. So that is this idea of pre-handling objections. I think it's really valuable. It's a fun thing to do. And the next suggestion here is actually to practice a lot. Now, one of the things that you can do when you're practicing is you will actually start to think about potential objections as you practice out loud multiple times. So this is like, you're going to have your PowerPoint slides, you're going to go in a room, you're going to pretend you're presenting to a group, and you're going to listen to what you say. And you're going to, as you go through that, you're going to achieve a few things. One is you may find things you want to fix in your slides where they're not as clear as they could be. You may find out that you can remove a lot of words. That's always a good thing, to remove words from your slides. But you also will probably think of, well, this raises a question, doesn't it? And so you make a note of that, and you either answer the question in the slide, or you make a note that you need to remember to answer that question when you get to that slide in your presentation. So this is one of the multiple reasons why practicing out loud is so valuable. You start to recognize the objections that might come up, and at that point you're then prepared to start addressing those in the real live presentation. You're also going to find problems in the presentation that you can fix before you present it, and that's a really good thing. And of course, just being more familiar with your topic or with your content, it turns out to be, that's really valuable. It makes you look like a much better presenter. So practice out loud multiple times if you can. Practicing once is way better than not practicing at all. Practicing twice is way better than practicing once, and so on. There's probably diminishing returns, but practicing twice is not, you're not hitting that by practicing twice. Pretty confident about that. So let me talk a little bit about some books that are great to refer to about persuasion and related things. I will put this list of books in the show notes, in the notes for this video as well. I'll have another video next week about part 2 of some other persuasion tips that are also really valuable. And we may drill down into some of these techniques, in particular the Andy Raskin technique's pretty fun, and I like talking about that, so we'll maybe do that next week as well. So if you want to see more from me, you can get my book, The Secret Product Manager Handbook. It's available on Amazon in Kindle and paperback. You can go to secretpmhandbook.com to learn a lot of stuff about product management and things that I've written over the years on my blog. There's a lot on things like go-to-market and persuasion and all kinds of things. I'm on Twitter. I'm at Nilsey on Twitter. I have the blog. I mentioned that. I have a podcast at alltheresponsibility.com. Again, I'll put all these links in the show notes. And of course, on YouTube, I have the Secret Product Manager Secret Product Manager Handbook as my channel. And the other thing I wanted to mention, I am working on a course on persuasion, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well, but it's secretpmhandbook.com/persuasion. You can sign up to be on the notification list for that. So if you like this video, be sure to click that like button. If you think it's valuable information that some of your colleagues might find value in, please share it to them. If you have any questions or comments, love to get those. And so you can comment right on the video. I always answer things. And I think that's about it. Your comments do mean a lot to me. I really like to hear what people are thinking about, and certainly questions, things I didn't cover, because I can cover those again in future videos. I'm here every Monday night at 7:30 Pacific time. And of course, the videos are always available as recordings. And I think that's about it. So thanks for watching and listening. And that is it for today.